All right, everyone, it's time for some more fun political analysis. Fun because, again, it was pretty predictable this would happen. Although Joe Biden's catastrophic fall in polling, and this follows a mild recovery, which I had predicted prior as people started forgetting about the Afghanistan withdrawal debacle, because that, of course, that's a foreign thing. American citizens, it's not on the border, it's not in some people's backyards, it's not in their pocketbooks. So a lot of people don't care. What's happening, though, is that every month you get a new jobs report. You get a new report on inflation. It's always been bad. There has not been one positive report since Joe Biden has been president. He has come in far below expectations on job growth. In a couple cases, unemployment even inched up certain times month over month. New unemployment claims are now soaring because he's threatening to have literally millions of people fired. That's a great idea, by the way, when you've already got chronic shortages. Yeah, we're just going to fire 10-15% of certain shipping companies and manufacturing plants during shortages with stagflation. This will go over well. I'm almost thinking it's sort of like a game of chicken, and at the last moment he might back off actually giving the OSHA requirements fangs, and he's just hoping that it'll coerce as many people as possible to get the jab before that inevitable time where he says, no, actually, we decided not to impose the actual penalty for not following the vaccine mandate. So we're not going to force you to fire people because, reasons, a certain amount of people were vaccinated or, unity or something. It'd be very, very funny if that happens. Unfortunately, I don't think it will, so we're about to see millions of new unemployed people. And so Biden's approval is cratering. Also, you got to understand, most people in the U.S. don't live next to the border. But there are tens of millions that do live near the border, and they're seeing an even bigger crisis, and a lot of those people voted for Biden. The southern border region, partially because of racial demographics, has typically been very heavily Democrat. That is beginning to change, and change drastically. Fucking election over election, probably the biggest single demographic shift in that short a period, maybe in U.S. political history, happened in the last election towards Trump, away from Biden among Hispanic voters. And if you look, a lot of that demographic shift, southern Texas specifically. There are millions of people in the Rio Grande Valley. And I have a feeling that there are a few more GOP signs up down there than when I was there back in the late 2000s. Anyway, before we go into this, and there will be a link, by the way, in the description, archived, of course, to this particular polling period on RCP. I'll get into polling aggregates and what you can and cannot tell from them. Get into the standard sticks, hex, and hammer poll analysis, because, of course, at this point, the 22 election, I guess, is basically beginning C-SPAN covering Trump's rally the other day as part of campaign 2024. See the writing on the wall, everyone. I'm very, very excited. Keep in mind there will be, though, if you're watching this video on YouTube, a pinned comment down below with links to 4 other video hosting sites that I use. I make 2 exclusive videos every single day. They don't end up on YouTube because, they're on verboten topics or whatever. Anyway, right now, the slide in Joe Biden's approval and his spiking in disapproval back up to roughly where it was right after the worst part of the Afghanistan withdrawal. Lowest approval ever, second highest disapproval ever. And this isn't a cherry-picked aggregate. Again, I'll get into that. It's not due to Afghanistan. People have forgotten about that. They don't even talk about it. For some, it's about the border crisis. For more, it's about their wallets. And that's a combination of, hey, I don't have a job. Hey, I can't find a job. The unemployment levels right now, you shouldn't even pay attention to them when they say unemployment dropped. That's because month over month more people dropped off the radar because they're not seeking a job because of the expanded unemployment benefits. They are literally paying millions of people right now not to work. They're making more than they think that they could make out there in the job environment. And by the way, I don't even blame these people. I don't call them lazy. With inflation eroding wages, it doesn't matter if the job's offering $1 an hour more than it was before. Hey, I get an extra $1 an hour, but I have to work 40 hours a week. I have to commute. I have to take a huge chunk out of my schedule that I could be taking up sitting on the couch or playing tennis or something like that, doing whatever the fuck I want to do. And that new $1 an hour isn't even keeping pace with inflation. We have very high inflation right now, to the point where if a worker doesn't get a wage increase, a fairly significant raise, like 10 cents an hour or something, If they're not getting like $1, $2 an hour raise right now, they've lost money. They're working just as hard for less money right now in an environment where some businesses have limited their workforce and the workers have to work fucking harder too. This is Bidenomics. This was also, by the way, very predictable. When I look therefore at his polling numbers and I see that they are collapsing, and this is among cherry-picked polls. Quinnipiac is not run by the GOP. When Quinnipiac, in a poll, by the way, that sampled Democrats +5, which is, I think at this point, probably not completely accurate. I have a feeling a lot of people are burning their Democratic registration cards right now. When that poll shows a systemic collapse to the lowest approval of his presidency, that's damning. Now, keep in mind, and I pointed this out a couple of days ago, I think the disapproval number is more important at this point than the approval number. Number one, you've got soft and hard approval. That always kind of makes that number fudgy. But number two, what a lot of that disapproval represents, and again, you can't know the actual number, but you can look at the velocity and the trajectory of things. I'll get into that in a moment analytically. What's important to know is that disapproval number takes into consideration a large proportion of Democrats, people who essentially voted for Biden holding their nose because they hated Trump, and because recency bias is already wearing off. Even if Trump were to run again in 24, that bias wouldn't be there. Biden would be sunk. They voted for Biden because of one maybe element of his plans that they liked, or maybe they just went in for to the primaries for him and said, well, all these others are far left and scare me, or are non-viable. I'll just hold my nose for him, and then, you've already voted in the primary, maybe you vote in the general. Now, these polls, partially because of sampling bias, partially because of bad sampling methodology, and partially because of mere statistical noise that happens in any aggregate, cannot tell you the real number for Biden's approval, his disapproval, or anything else under the sun. Direction of the country, Pelosi approval. Do you believe in building a wall? What's your approval of the COVID response? None of these things can be directly measured unless you poll literally everyone who would be eligible to have an opinion on a topic. But if you take the same sampling methodology, and apply it over dozens of polling firms over short periods of time, and you take snapshots in time, month after month, of the same issue, you can see the trajectory. I do not believe that the aggregate with regards to Biden's approval was ever accurate. I think his approval is a good 3 or 4 points below what it always has been registered as. Partially, I base that on the fact that a lot of these polling firms have a sampling size which is overwhelmingly Democratic, and the country is not overwhelmingly Democratic. It's not necessarily a 50-50. Democrats somewhat outnumber Republicans in registration terms. That doesn't matter, though. There's a difference between +2 and +19. We have seen polls where the sampling bias is in the double digits. That's because they've picked through their data, they've adjusted it, in part because of perceived turnout from the last few elections. Well, if you're looking at that, of course, Trump loses the popular vote both times. Biden gets a record number of votes, so naturally there must be a lot more Democrats. We've adjusted our system. It's no longer +3 Dem, it's +6 Dem. The problem is you're taking soft support or reluctant support that's not even Democratic, and you're assuming a partisan bent in it, and you're adjusting your poll accordingly. I think the aggregate at a minimum has been dragged 3 points in Biden's favor the entire time. If I apply that logic, he's already down around 40% approval, and he could be a little bit below that. The funny part is that Trump, supposedly the orange, less intelligent version of Joseph Goebbels, managed to get considerably higher approval and lower disapproval than this multiple times throughout his presidency. Now, keep in mind one other thing. This is while the entire legacy media continues to refuse to actually report on half the problems in the country. This is while they put the inflation numbers on page B. This is while most of them outright ignore the border crisis unless there's one specific significant flashpoint. Who among the legacy media outlets has criticized, other than when she went to El Paso very briefly, how many of them have criticized our border czar for never having visited the border? And instead going off to Japan, going to Honduras, going to the UK, going to Vietnam, going to Singapore, meeting with little kids in schools and cackling and pretending that she actually likes being around kids. Now, that's Joe Biden's job. Her job's to be at the border and be managing things there. Nobody's criticizing her. Is Joe Biden criticized the way Trump was for his manner of speaking? When Trump made a single verbal error, if he said covfefe or something, everyone started talking about Alzheimer's disease. Did you see Biden's spiel, which I covered in my last live stream? By the way, I'll be doing another today, where for about a minute and a half, he was going through a list of people. He couldn't remember names. He couldn't remember titles. His words are running together. He gets all confused. He looks befuddled. That's not reported on. I would think that when a person's pushing 80 years old and they're having that kind of difficulty, and they do not, objectively, you can look back at reels of him talking for hundreds of hours overall, absolutely and objectively does not have a speech impediment, or hasn't shown symptoms of one at least since the goddamn 1960s, I would think that might be something kind of worth at least a page C article, right? Of course not, says CNN. That's a conspiracy theory. Did any of them cover Hunter Biden's laptop being verified? Because this was a big piece of news in the last election. I was assured I was a conspiracy theorist for talking about it. Well, we know it's real. That probably would have swung the election. There's a reason why none of these news organizations bothered to talk about it. They all got, the phone was ringing off the hook from DNC headquarters and from Biden Incorporated, and they demanded that they bury the story. Don't talk about it. If you have to mention it at all, in journalistic integrity that you don't actually have, make sure to say it's a conspiracy theory. It's all bullshit. So keep in mind, Biden's approval is at 43 right now. In a cherry-picked aggregate, with chronic missampling among at least half the polling firms there, while the entire legacy media and big tech are all forming a wall of defense around him in order to try to silence or stifle his enemies, in order to abuse dissidents that disagree with him, in order to label as conspiracy theorists or violent extremists anyone who doesn't believe in the direction the country is going. And that would be, by the way, another thing. I have a feeling some of this loss of approval is among parents in public schools who are tired of being told what to do. People who are independent. Before, they're like, hey, I'm not taken in by critical race theory, because there's like a 70% disapproval of the concept among independent voters in the United States. Just so you're aware, the Democrats do not have this issue. Only a simple majority of Democrats support the concept of teaching CRT in public schools, mainly because it's horseshit. It'll dumb down the educational system, and if they're Democrats, they've talked a big game about loving higher education and shit like that. Okay, well then stand your ground and stick to your guns and actually stand for that instead of saying, instead let's get rid of the gifted programs in New York. Let's screw all the poor kids who happen to have a reasonably high IQ. They shouldn't be allowed to be privy to the same kind of coursework in an accelerated pace that all the rich kids will automatically get in their private schools. Fuck the poor. That's basically what New York Democrats, by the way, are saying, along with Oregon Democrats, I believe, as well. But right now, parents also have been completely alienated by the administration. The administration is attempting to weaponize the Department of Justice and the FBI in order to snoop on, spy on, silence, and intimidate parents for going to school board meetings. Well, there are a lot of parents in the country, and I don't think it's very divisive as an issue. I don't think that framing it as it's threats to the school board from these evil Gadsden flag-wearing MAGA hat wearers, that's not really what's happening. What's happening is you are attempting to intimidate people simply for doing their job as parents, for being involved in their kids' education. That's what they're supposed to be doing. That's not divisive. Most Democratic parents with kids in the public school system want to do that too. They're more likely to show up at the school board meeting. That's probably why CRT silently was slipped into so many curricula. Well, now that the shoe's on the other foot and all of these other parents saying, hey, something fishy's going on, but hey, Steve Bannon and Sticks and all these other people tell me there's something I can do about it. I can show up and I can vote these people out. Maybe I can become a precinct captain or something. We can change the system from the bottom up. Now that there's an ongoing effort to do that, all of a sudden the FBI needs to get involved. This is terrorism, or terrorism adjacent. And by the way, the damage control from the Democrats on the CRT issue, especially attendant Biden's stupidity at attempting to get Merrick Garland involved, his stupidity at trying to weaponize the intel agencies to go after parents who go up to a school board meeting and say, hey, fuck you, to the point where a lot of these school boards are moving to remote-only meetings. They're doing that in order to preclude the parents from having direct involvement. It's not out of fear. It's out of malice. They're propagandists. They should all be fired from their positions. They should all be goddamn exiled. The stupidity of this is clearly wearing on his polling. It's contemporary with the drop in his polling. And this is just a couple of polls, by the way, that came in hot and new that show that collapse. He's down several points and up several points in disapproval just because of a couple of polling firms. The other ones haven't even come in yet. We don't even have the real number. It's probably going to continue dropping for some time now. He might end up in the cherry-picked aggregate. He could end up sub 40. I don't think so. I think it gets him close, but not quite there. That's damning. It certainly lost steam faster than Donald Trump. And of course, Donald Trump was on the opposite end in all of those cherry-picked aggregates. Keep in mind that if you look at the actual results, the polling didn't quite keep up now, did it, in multiple states? That's about all. Peace out.